Thank you for tuning in to this CD. This particular message is entitled Waking Up. My name is Jess Herriott. I'm a spirituality teacher based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And whether you have picked up this product directly from me at one of my events, from my website, or from someone else, I want to say thank you for your support. So, to go ahead and get started, I want to focus your attention not just on the mind or consciousness, but I want to focus your attention on the contents of consciousness. Many times we get caught up in our own conscious content, the things that are going on inside of our own minds. And instead of using those things, the contents of consciousness, all of our experience, instead of using that as stair steps, I should say, to understand the mind and to find ways of living and being in the world that's more suitable for where it is that we are trying to go in our life's journey, we often get caught up by them and they become traps for us. So, our moods, our feelings, our desires, our appetites, instead of helping us to learn more about ourselves, so to speak, they become the ropes that tie us up and we get locked down instead of getting more free. And so this talk is entitled Waking Up, and it's designed to help you free yourself. First of all, I want to say this, that when it comes down to feelings, feelings come and go like clouds in the sky. Science tells us that clouds are formed when warm air rises, expands, and then cools. The vapor that was brought into the atmosphere when the air arose, I should say, it evaporates. The vapor that remains condenses around dust particles in the air, and when billions of vapor droplets come together around those dust particles, they form a single cloud. So when we're looking at clouds as a singular thing up in the sky, they're actually representatives of processes. And so are you. When you look at yourself as a singular thing, as a singular object separated from the world, and many times when we feel like our backs are up against the wall, first of all, we're not just singular objects. We're actually processes. We're representations of millions of different processes that are occurring all at once. If you don't believe me, close your eyes right where you are. Now, ask yourself these questions. Your heart beating? Are you a cardiac specialist? You know, your brain working correctly, all your synapses are forming and you're thinking thoughts and you have all these different things going on. Are you doing it? You know, you are bigger than what you are. You are bigger than your conception of yourself. So there's no single thought that's strong enough to actually bind you because the you that you identify with is actually much bigger than the you that's being presented by that particular thought process. See, another thing, our bodies. Our bodies seem like singular things, so to speak, and they're entire communities of processes that work together in harmony to help bring about this experience that we call being alive. We're all not neurosurgeons, but again, our brains are doing their thing. We're not cardiac experts again, but our hearts are beating. And so all of this intelligence is all around us, right? So perhaps the problem isn't so much what we experience on the outside. The problem is with our thinking, it's with the contents of our consciousness. Again, instead of allowing the feelings and the thoughts to show us more about the self and to take us deeper into this experience that we call consciousness or life or whatever you want to call it, we allow these things to trap us and to bind us and tie us down. When in fact, it should be the opposite. The thoughts, the feelings, the desires, the things that spring up from within your consciousness should be key indicators as to where you should pay attention to and where your energy should go. And life often gives us these opportunities to see ourselves more clearly. Life presents us with little mirrors. Situations are mirrors into the self and mirrors into the soul. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world based on the way we are. So when you're presented with an opportunity, you have the responsibility, again, the ability to respond. And based on how you respond emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually, it shows you about yourself. So everywhere you go, there you are. Every circumstance you encounter, there you are. Every situation you deal with, there you are. And so life presents us with mirrors of opportunities, a myriad of opportunity, or a myriad of mirrors, I should say. Life, in essence, is a hall of mirrors. And so we're constantly bombarded with opportunities to know ourselves. And so spirituality is an opportunity to do the deep work. So if you encounter a self or a fragment of yourself that you aren't sure about or you don't believe is helpful or necessary to your evolution, then spiritual practice and other things are out there and available to you to help to work and cultivate that part of yourself that may need more attention. Now, all of that being said, again, I have to say this, and I said it earlier, the contents of your consciousness are not, I should say, designed or they're not, their purpose isn't to trap you. You should never become so entangled in your thoughts that you can't be free, because again, these are invisible processes that are binding us up and making us feel all twisted inside. You're all upset and you're all worried for nothing, because you're not physically being bound or twisted, and no one is physically bothering you. You're bothering yourself. So again, these invisible processes are what's getting us down, when in fact these invisible processes should be building us up so that we can have strength physically in the world. This mind that we have, this reality creating machine, helps us to navigate in the world around us. And many times, our understanding of it is limited. You do the best you can based on the knowledge that you have, and that's understandable. For example, think about your normal day-to-day experience in the world. Many of us experience the world as self and other, as opposed to experiencing the world in a state of oneness. I say all the time, we should know before we go. Know that we're healthy, know that we're healed, know that we're whole, and then go out into the world. Because when you know before you go, you move from a place of strength. In the Christian mythology, there's a famous quotation by Jesus that says that you can't put old wine into new skins, except they will burst based on the process in which they were fermentating and producing and making and selling their wine. It's the same thing. You can't produce a positive life from a negative state. You have to change and convert that energy alchemically into something positive in order to produce positive. Optimism is a spiritual practice. And so, as we move through the world, many times we feel, based on the contents of our consciousness, that we are behind our eyes and the world is out there in front of us, that we are an individual self out there in the world and the world is the other. Well, consciousness as a whole, or life as a whole, is a spectrum. Our experience of this self over here in the world over there, that's simply one channel or one way of looking at the experience of life. The spectrum, or the process that makes us us, is actually much bigger than our minds, the reality creating machine, will allow us to pick up on at times. For example, consciousness is one. Consciousness in its, I should say, ultimate state, in its more liberated state, in its deepest state, it's free from emotions. Consciousness is the ground of being, and everything else emerges from within it. So ego, shadow, persona, our sense of our little individual sense of self, all of this emerges from this state of what we call Brahman or God or whatever else you want to call it, whatever name you want to give it. And so as we move through life, our normal state, based on the contents of our consciousness, sometimes we move through life uh, from a state of fragmentation and not necessarily from the state of wholeness. But wholeness is our true state. We are the wave, I should say, and this consciousness is the ocean. Oceans wave, consciousness peoples, in the words of Alan Watts. In other words, the people and consciousness, or the ocean and the wave, they're of the same substance, although one may feel like it has an individual existence of in and of itself, and then that's still fine too, because through the differentiation of our experience in life, it's how we learn. We learn through this duality, through looking at things, separating things from ourselves and then looking at it. The problem, again, is not in dividing things and looking at the world as being out there and you over here. The problem is when we stay in that state, we don't return back to wholeness. Consciousness is both the one and it's also the many. Think about it like this: if consciousness or God was a blank wall, and I were to draw lines, lateral and parallel lines on the blank wall, it would produce little square boxes. The little square boxes would be us, consciousness, this overarching essence from which all things emerge, all states of experience, whether you want to call it God, Brahman, Atman, whatever. That would be us together. That would be the white wall. And our individual experiences of ourselves would be the boxes. Now, if I were to take away the lines, all you have is the white wall. The lines, both parallel and perpendicular, straight and lateral, the lines would represent time and space. So if I were to take consciousness and place it within the parameters of time and space and it produces us, at the end of the day, it's still consciousness. It's still God. So at your core, you're an individualized expression of this wholeness. This individualization is how God or consciousness knows and experiences itself in the world. We are scientists first and foremost. And so our job is to learn and grow and experience life. Spiritual practice shouldn't pull you away from life. Spiritual practice thrusts you deeper into life. Thank you for listening to this part of this CD project. On the next track, I will guide the listener into what I call the waking up meditation. This particular meditation is designed to help you to digest this teaching as well as wake up, I should say, into life. We don't come into life, we come out from life. So, from life into life. And with that sort of mentality, there's no way in the world that you won't have the technology or the tools necessary to make it through the world. Life may be hard, but spiritual technologies take away some of the hardness. It's like life isn't easy, but spirituality makes things easier. And so I would rather go through life with technologies and tools than going through life barehanded. Spirituality places tools and technologies in your hand to help you to navigate, because life isn't just physical, life is psychological and spiritual and emotional. And so you'll need tools to help you to navigate the contents of your experience of the world around you. To bring you back to the core of my message is about wholeness, togetherness. Many times, the world, when we get caught up in the world and we're doing our thing and living our lives, we feel separate. Like I said previously, like the world is over there and we're over here. But when we close our eyes and when we open it, there's a symphony of experience going on all at once. We see color, sight, some of us feeling, we feel the wind blowing against our skin. Everything happens all at once. People, trees, the environment, all at once. Consciousness doesn't pause us and we have to for wait every 3 seconds for filters to come in and for information to come into our experience, and then color first, sound, etc., etc. It comes all at once. And so reality shows up for us in the sense of wholeness. So wholeness is our true state. This particular project is to remind you that wholeness is your state, that even though you may feel fragmented at times, that the you that is fragmented is only a small portion of who you are. The typical experience that an individual has of themselves is like the iceberg. They only experience the tip of the iceberg, not realizing that the iceberg is much, much, much deeper than they've seen. And my final goal is to remind you that many times you can't see your true self because it is your true self that is doing the seeing. Fire cannot burn itself, a knife cannot cut itself. And so I would posit to you, the listener, that you cannot see your true self, because to see it is to separate yourself from it. And there are parts of yourself that you cannot separate yourself from. Consciousness sees itself through you. So it differentiates itself, And through that differentiation, by splitting itself apart or splitting itself in two, it allows the, I should say, the more dense and more gross aspects of consciousness to look back at it. And this is how it engages and experiences itself. It's how spirit engages itself. The one becomes the two. God sends his only son or daughter, right? So that God at its utmost can experience God at its innermost, if I should say that. And so your experience of the world around you, even though you may feel like the world is out there and you're back here, it's not a trap. It's a way to engage the world. You are in the world, but the world is also in you. Yes, there is a state of separateness, but separateness is not your permanent condition. Wholeness is your permanent condition. Separateness is your way of experiencing the world. So come back. Come back to yourself. Come back to your original home. Come back to wholeness. I hope by the end of this message, by the end of this project, after you've gone through this a couple times and you pop it in, whenever you're feeling like you're falling back into sleep or you just need that refresher, because spirituality is all about reminding us of what we've known for years but have forgotten, in order to help us to accept those things that we refuse to accept so that we can be who we are still yet trying to become. After you've done all that, I hope that this information becomes a part of your DNA and that you can go on and go further in your own exploration of your own conscious experience of the world. My name is Jess Herriott. Stay tuned for track 2. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to track 2 of this meditation project. Now, as we begin the guided meditation, I wanted to create a meditation that was simple, that was quick, and I call it the waking up meditation because it's obviously designed to wake you up, into life, to remind you that you are already awoken, I should say. So perhaps waking up isn't a great title. The point is, I think that we should move through the world as scientists rather than seekers. We should experiment, and our minds are the greatest laboratories that the universe could provide to us. The contents of our consciousness are amazing. And so there are technologies that are available to help us to explore the contents of our own consciousness. Our own consciousness is inclusive of the entire world. By the way, famous spiritual quote suggests that we are in the world and the world is also in us. Yes, you are physically on planet Earth. However, planet Earth is also within your awareness. You can become aware of the planet Earth. And by becoming aware, you consume, I should say, the Earth. You swallow the universe. It's swallowed by your consciousness. Right now, I am existing inside of your consciousness. Your ears, your senses, they're all extensions of yourself. You feel that you're driving in your car right now, listening to me talk. However, your sight, your sense of touch, your sense of feeling are all filtering back into one major sense, your consciousness sense, I should say. They're extensions of the self. They extend the self. They bring things to you. So you are bigger than what you feel yourself to be. Even when you are offended, only a small portion of you is offended. There are parts of you that could never be offended because it's beyond offense. You can't offend consciousness. Consciousness doesn't get upset or angry. It's beyond that. And so our our sense of self in a normal sense, where we feel over here and the world is over there, that's great when we are exploring and engaging the world. But whenever it becomes weakened, I should say, the tiny us, the ego, there's a larger sense of I. We call it the the I behind the I, where we can draw strength and energy so that we can go back out into the world, I should say. And out is a bad metaphor, but we can go back out into the world and play. And so our experience of the world becomes richer. Our experience of the world becomes deeper. We can love harder. We see opportunity when others don't see opportunity, all because we woke up. We woke up from the illusion that we are just these little finite egos living in a world that's bigger than us, that's trying to mess with us, that's out to get us, when in fact everything has been given to you as a playground. All you have to do is go outside and play and enjoy the world around you, and the world becomes richer. Even the hard things you smile at because you recognize that they're just opportunities for you to demonstrate and not problems and obstacles to trip you up and hold you back. Right where you are, get relaxed. I'm not going to tell you to close your eyes. The Dzogchen meditation, the meditative techniques from the East, from a particular strain of Buddhism, I should say, they meditate in this particular strain with their eyes open. And there are other strains of or techniques or technologies by which people meditate with their eyes open. So feel free to meditate with your eyes open. Secondly, I'm going to suggest that you place your feet flat. Relax your feet as much as you can. If you're driving, please don't. And I want you to, first of all, bring attention to your feet. Ask yourself this: how am I walking? Because whether we realize it or not, the emotional strain or psychological strain we carry around with us, we transfer that energy into our feet. So, how are you walking? Are you walking hurriedly? Or are you walking at a slow and steady pace? Because the way you walk and the amount of energy you place in the way you walk tells a lot about your personality and about your state of consciousness or the contents of your experience at that moment in time. Thich Nhat Hanh says it like this. He says that we should be mindful of how we tread upon the back of Mother Earth because she supports us. The Earth, our mother, doesn't allow us to float off into space because gravity holds us down. Mother Earth never complains. We walk, we run, we engage in all sorts of mischief, but yet she just is. And so anytime you feel lost or feel stressed out, the first thing I want to remind you is that if you can place both of your feet flat on the ground, even if you cannot stand, you are supported. So in this meditation, while your feet are flat, be mindful of what it is that you're doing, placing your feet flat on the floor, obviously, and take away from that simple technique that you are supported. So from this feeling of supportedness, I can see support out in the world because we see the world as we are. If we're feeling bad, it's hard to see good or to create out in the world. Some of us can create decent works or do decent things whenever we're feeling bad, but you create and you are at your best when you are feeling your best, obviously. So, meditation, just a sidebar, one of its principles or one of its benefits of this particular technology is to place you in the best state, a state of normalcy, a state of where you're just awake. This isn't about a peak experience. Meditation or mindfulness isn't about a high feeling because the other side of high is low. So, whenever you are chasing highs in spiritual practice or spirituality, from a technological point of view, if you're chasing highs, then be prepared for the lows because there are going to be things, unless you just isolate yourself from the world around you, there are going to be things that will knock you down and take away the high. So, spiritual practice is all about finding a state of normalcy, a cruise control, I should say, where you can enter into life. In the words of St. Paul, the mystic Paul, I've been abound and I've been abased. And so his commentary in the New Testament in Christian mythology was to remind his listeners that he's found a middle ground wherewith he can move and be in the world. And that middle ground approach pulls you out of the supernatural, but it opens you up to the numinous. In other words, you see the workings of the miraculous in your normal everyday experience. So, with your feet flat on the floor, we've already recognized that we're already supported, that we're always supported mentally, physically, psychologically, just based on the simpleness of our feet being flat on the floor. Now, I want to take you deeper into who you really are. You already know this, but perhaps you haven't been aware of this in a long time. Some of us feel like we're little egos sitting behind our eyes, looking out at the world. I just want to tell you, if you were to examine your brain, there is no ghost inside of the machine, making the machine that is you, your experience of yourself, work. There is no white spot in your brain where a scientist can say that's the ego and that's driving the show. That's the little person inside of your head. That's a trick. That's not who you really are. But I can tell you this: that experience, that little ego, that is who is offended. That is who gets upset. That is who is afraid. That is who doesn't have the answer, or who is afraid to look for the answer. And it is even that experience of self that makes us come up with excuses as to why we cannot, we would not, or we should not do what it takes in order to better ourselves and our circumstances. With that in mind, because that is all that we feel ourselves to be, this little person hiding inside of a body of flesh in the world out there, I want you to bring your attention to that for a minute. Bring your attention to that. Become aware of your sense of self. Now ask yourself, if I am aware of my sense of self, am I myself, or am I this feeling of awareness that is aware of this sense of self? What you just did was you turned consciousness on its head. You identified with the feeling of who you are, and then you became aware of who you are. The awareness is big enough to contain your sense of self. So perhaps your sense of self is not all of who you are. At your core, you are the awareness that contains all of the contents of your experience. And that awareness has many names. We call that awareness God. We call that awareness the Atman, Brahma. We call that ultimate consciousness. We call that big mind. We call that infinite mind. We call that love, love, beauty. We call that infinite joy, infinite goodness. We call that the thing itself. That's who you are. The awareness with which contains all states of awareness. Now, what I would like for you to do is pay attention to your thoughts for a second. Many times we identify with our thought process. Focus on your thoughts. Now ask yourself, where do my thoughts come from? When we pay attention to our thoughts, as a scientist, if we pay close attention, we will find that thoughts naturally arise within our experience of consciousness and our experience of the world. We don't always think thoughts, although we have the ability to think thoughts. Thoughts seem to think themselves. They seem to just arise. So if you are not, I should say you, the ego, but you, if you aren't the originator of your thoughts, then where do thoughts come from? Thoughts, like waves, originate from the cosmic ocean, which is consciousness. So even though we can think, and even though we have internal conversations, we are not those thoughts. So when those thoughts, when they come up from this infinite state of consciousness, when they come up and they don't align with certain truths that you know to be self-evident, like the truth of the matter is that you're whole, that you're blessed, that you are alive, that you have the potential to accomplish your life's purpose, I should say. When thoughts come up to contradict that or to challenge that, you have the right to not identify with that thought. In other words, every thought that arises within your experience isn't who you really are at your core. You can separate yourself from that thought, from that experience, and move away from that state and move into a state of wholeness. In the same manner that you separate yourself from a physical person who no longer means you any good. Thoughts are powerless in and of themselves. Similar to feelings, thought and feeling require you, consciousness, to feed them. For example, thoughts, if you don't consciously think arise, and disappear. If you don't believe it, think about all of the things that you have forgotten. Hard to do. It's hard to think about what you've forgotten because the idea of forgetting implies that something is not there. It was there, but it's no longer there. When you think about all of the things that you have forgotten, it should indicate to you that thoughts have no power unless there is an awareness that is there to consistently sustain it. Thoughts are like clouds, they come and go. Feelings are like clouds, they come and go. So when we feel that we are trapped in our feelings, that we can't let go, that this is all that we have, that we won't have anything more, and all of those feelings of lack, limitation, and scarcity that come up, when we are attached to those feelings, don't think about it. Let it come up, feel it, don't think about it. Sit there, monitor the feeling, don't associate with it. Let it come up and let it go. And if you do that, you will find that those feelings have no power in and of themselves. They will come up, present their case, and they will disappear. They will only reemerge if you call them. In the words of Yeshua, my sheep hear my voice, and a stranger they will not follow. So your thoughts arise, but they only remain if you continually feel them, dwell on them, empower them. When you disempower certain feelings, they disappear. Just like the feeling of love, it dies if you don't feed it. Think about this the next time that you tell someone you love them. The minute that they show behavior that challenges your love, because your love is unconditional in some cases, but in many cases it's not. When that love dies, ask yourself this same question that we've been asking all along. How powerful are my feelings? Do I have to identify with these feelings? And you will find that the ones you choose to identify with, the ones that you want to identify with, the ones that you pay attention to, those are the ones that remain. I said all that to say this: you have more power than you realize. And so when you begin to apply these sorts of technologies to your experience of your consciousness, you clean house. And so you no longer experience the world as a terror. You no longer feel like it's you versus the world. You no longer feel like a terrorist of your own mind, that you have to attack your own mind or attack the world head on as if the world is your enemy. The world in front of you in fact, it doesn't even have any doors. It's not even an open door policy. The world has no doors. When you close your eyes and open them, you experience reality all at once. No limitations outside of the physical challenges that sometimes beset some of us. But even in those cases, when one physical sense is limited, another one is there. And when all physical senses have been limited and reduced in their faculty, your consciousness is still there and available for you to experience a brand new reality that some of us don't even get to experience. Now I want you to focus your attention on your body. For those of you that become trapped in your body, our bodies are beautiful. Ask yourself this question: am I my body, or do I have a body? Those questions can be liberating, but they can also be binding. Your sense of body is not all of who you are, but you can bring all of who you are into your sense of body. In the same manner, your experience of self is not all of who you are, but you can bring all of who you are into your sense of self. Your sense of thought, your thoughts, your feelings, they're not all of who you are, but you can bring all of who you are into your thought and feeling. And by doing so, you move from life into life. instead of moving from a state of not having life into life. Because if you move from a state of not having life, not being alive, into life, you will only experience more of what you are. Which is why I suggest to you that you move from a principle and a state of life into life. Everything you do, move from life into life. You were not born into the world, you were born out of the world. You came out of the world into the world. So all you did was come out of yourself, the world, consciousness. You came out from God, out from spirit, into matter. So you came out from life into life. There was never a time in which you were not alive. And on that note, I want to show you another technique. Many times we feel as if we are this experience of self, this experience of body, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that unless it becomes trapping and we feel that this is all that we are reduced to, flesh and bones, and the occasional thought. What I would like for you to do, bring your sense of self into your awareness. Pay attention to your breathing. Breathing is an anchor. Breathing connects you with your sense of self. It connects you with your inner state, with your feelings. If you follow your breath, you can tell your emotional state, whether tired or lethargic or fiery or upset. When you're upset, your breathing picks up. When you're tired and lethargic, your breathing slows down and naturalizes and neutralizes. Now, instead of breathing, imagine being breathed. Imagine that you are breathing you. Imagine that you are life animating your experience of yourself. Imagine that you are breath blowing into Susie, into Martha, into Janie. Step outside of your body and imagine yourself as the breath animating the body, the mind, the soul. And the body, the mind, or soul are just masks. Because this, in fact, is who you are at your core. You are life itself, breathing and knowing and experiencing life itself. Life on one side of the breath is the same as the life on the other side of the breath. E equals mc squared. Energy is matter. Matter is energy. It's simply a condensed form of energy. Emotions are simply energy in motion. When you slow down the motion, the energy subsides. It's all connected. It always has been connected. Science and spirituality are not mutually exclusive, they are mutually inclusive. They need each other. In the Garden of Eden, in the biblical tradition, there's not two trees in the garden, there's one tree. The second tree appears when we see it there. You have the power. Hell only becomes hell when you invite the demons in. When you exterminate the demons, hell isn't hellacious anymore. Hell becomes heaven. And if you don't believe that, imagine a person who has all the opportunity and potential in the world, but yet they're still suffering. They're in hell while in heaven. With the right state of consciousness, you can be in a hellacious circumstance and still experience the heavenly state because heaven and hell are states of consciousness. In the biblical tradition, David says in the Old Testament mythology that if I make my bed in heaven, you're there, and if I make my bed in hell, you're there. The mystic Paul says in the same tradition that in God we live, move, and have our being. In other words, God or consciousness isn't a being, it's the ground of being. And so, if in this ground of being we live, move, and have our being, everything in consciousness is consciousness. Everything in God is God. Heaven and hell are states of consciousness, they emerge and arise. But hell only becomes a bad experience if you choose it to be that way. If you exterminate the demons, hell becomes heaven's condo. When you minimize the antagonism in your soul, you produce more room and more space for the heavenly abode to exist within you. As within, so without. The more room, the more space for heaven, for positivity, for optimism, for insight, for creativity, for intuition, the more you will experience it in your life. The inside and the outside, they're connected. I said all that to say this. By identifying your thought, by identifying your feeling, identifying your body, and then realizing that you transcend all of these things, but yet you are these things, it frees you. They become tools, tools that guide you and not bind you. You're not bound by your body. You're not bound by your mind. You're not bound by your feelings. They become tools and technologies for you to experience the world around you and bring more light into the world. By imagining yourself as oxygen, as life, breathing and animating this physical body, your experience of the self, the persona, instead of imagining yourself as the persona, as the self, as the body, and then sucking life in, you turn consciousness on its head. And so life takes on a deeper meaning in that regard. These two techniques can be amended, they can be changed, they can be condensed. Their job or function or benefit is to wake you up and allow you to see that you are more than what you typically experience yourself as. You have to remind yourself this daily. You have to see it, feel it, and believe it until it becomes a part of your DNA that you can recognize. Thank you for listening. My name has been Jess Herriott. I hope that these two tracks bless and enrich your life. For more information, please visit us on the web at www.fulfillment.com. That's FULFEELMENT.com for more information on products and other offerings from Jess Herriott. And also follow me on Facebook, on Twitter at Jess Herriott, Instagram as well, and catch me at an event near you. I travel regularly in the Southeast. I would love to meet you in person. Thank you for listening. Namaste. Peace and blessings.